Dear all, meine sehr geehrten Damen und Herren, liebe alle, this is what you're checked in for. It will be intriguing, I think. Sehr herzlich begrüße ich Sie alle zur diesjährigen Verleihung des Alfons Auer Ethik-Preises. Indem wir das tun, setzen wir ein kritisches Zeichen. Ein Zeichen im Blick auf die Welt, wie sie uns im Moment erscheint, aber auch ein Zeichen im Hinblick auf uns selbst. I would like to warmly welcome you all to this year's Alfons Auer Ethik Award ceremony. By doing so, we are sending a critical signal with regard to the world in which we live, but also with regard to ourselves. I welcome you all by referring to those who are not represented in this room. In the words of Leela Gandhi, the unpropertied masses, working men and women, the Lumpenproletariat, racial others, the crowd, the rebel, the undistinguished. Ich begrüße Sie alle, indem ich darauf verweise, dass viele Menschen in diesem Raum nicht repräsentiert sind. To make us aware that these people are missing among us, that is the commitment of Professor Dr. Leela Gandhi, whom I particularly welcome in our midst. She's the laureate of this evening. She gifts us with her reflection on postcolonial theory. She suggests an ethics of the hybrid, an ethics of non-perfectionism, and a political theory of democracy in which it is no longer only those who call the shots, in her own words, whose totalitarian self-development is based upon the cultivation of rank, purity, excellence, strength, heroism, exceptionality, and so forth. So in her own words. Das bringt mich dazu, kurz etwas zum Verlauf des Abends zu sagen. Wir werden uns bemühen, das Ganze zweisprachig zu machen, und zwar in einer Art und Weise, in der das Englische und das Deutsche stets miteinander korrespondieren. Verlassen Sie sich also auf die Sprache, die Ihnen am nächsten liegt, und Sie werden dabei dann nichts verpassen. Der Vortrag von Leela Gandhi wird auf Englisch gehalten werden. Eine deutsche Übersetzung, falls Sie möchten, liegt bereit. Uns darauf aufmerksam zu machen, das ist das, was ich vorhin formuliert habe, uns darauf aufmerksam zu machen, dass viele Menschen unter uns fehlen, das ist das Engagement von Leela Gandhi. Sie legt uns eine postkoloniale Ethik des Nicht-Perfekten ans Herz und eine politische Theorie der Demokratie, in der nicht mehr allein diejenigen das Sagen haben, die Rang und Exzellenz für sich beanspruchen. Und sie mutet uns dieses Denken zu, weil die Erfahrungen dahinter mit Gewalt, Kolonisierung und Ausschluss zu tun haben. A warm welcome, Leela Gandhi. We are here to honor your work and to learn from you. And for a whole week we have the opportunity to be in scientific and personal exchange with you. Nicht nur unsere Fakultät, sondern auch die Universität lebt von dem internationalen Austausch, den Sie uns anbieten. Sehr herzlich begrüße ich deswegen in unserer Mitte mit großer Freude unsere neue Rektorin, Professorin Dr. Carla Pollmann, seit dem 1. Oktober im Amt. There is little doubt, to quote Leela Gandhi again, there is little doubt that in its current mood, postcolonial theory principally addresses the needs of the Western academy. It attempts to reform the intellectual and epistemological exclusions of this academy and enables non-Western critics located in the West to present their cultural inheritance as knowledge. But of course, what postcolonial fails to recognize is that what counts as marginal in relation to the West has often been central and foundational to the non-West. Wir danken Ihnen, Frau Rektorin, dass Sie in Ihrem Grußwort genau auf diese Needs of the Western Academy zu sprechen kommen werden und dass unser internationaler Austausch im Hinblick darauf Profil gewinnt. Herzlich begrüßen möchte ich weiterhin Kollegin Professorin Dr. Ulrike Auger vom Institut für Missions-, Ökumene- und Religionswissenschaft an der Universität Hamburg. Sie wird als Laudatorin das Werk Leela Gandhis für uns erschließen und würdigen. Und zuvor wird Kollege Dietmar Mieth einige Worte gesagt haben, die uns mit dem Werk Alfons Auers bekannt machen. Herzlich willkommen, Kollegin Ulrike Auger und Kollege Dietmar Mieth. Dass wir all das überhaupt tun können, verdanken wir dem Stifter des Preises, Herrn Siegfried Weishaupt. Seien Sie herzlich willkommen geheißen zu diesem Festakt, der nur durch Ihre Großzügigkeit überhaupt möglich ist. Der Preis selbst und Ihre Anwesenheit unter uns zeigt eine doppelte Verbundenheit zu Alfons Auer, zu seinem Werk und zu dessen zukunftsweisender Bedeutung. Es ist Ihr Sinn für Kultur und Ihr Sinn für Ethik, der Sie auch als geschäftsführender Gesellschafter eines weltweit tätigen Unternehmens verbindet mit unserem heutigen Anliegen. Herzlich willkommen. Postcolonial theory is not only the concern of the university, but also of the churches. For far too long, Christianity itself has been a colonial power. We still have to learn to listen to those people whom we Europeans have long encountered as religious colonizers, self-assured, from above, with ethics whose validity we claimed for all people, with rules and ways of life that in fact enabled and justified oppression and exploitation. As churches and as Christians, the post-colonial discourse is absolutely our business for the sake of our own message. Postkoloniale Theorie geht, so meinen wir, eben nicht nur die Universität etwas an, sondern auch die Kirchen. Viel zu lange ist das Christentum selbst ein koloniales Unternehmen gewesen in allen seinen konfessionellen Spielarten. Uns als Kirchen und als ChristInnen geht der postkoloniale Diskurs um unserer eigenen Botschaft willen unbedingt etwas an. Und darum begrüße ich in unserer Mitte sehr herzlich Domkapitular Dr. Uwe Scharfenegger. Er vertritt die Diözese Rottenburg-Stuttgart und unseren Bischof. Vielen Dank, ich freue mich sehr, dass Sie hier sind. Und ebenso herzlich begrüße ich Dr. Verena Wottke-Werner als Direktorin der Katholischen Akademie der Diözese in Stuttgart. Sehr freuen wir uns über unsere Gäste, die unsere evangelische Schwesterfakultät und das Zentrum für islamische Theologie repräsentieren. Im Tübinger Campus der Theologien verbindet uns mittlerweile eine gute Partnerschaft. Herzlichen Dank für Ihr Kommen. Last not least, herzliche Begrüßung an unseren Pianisten. Michael Schlierf, vielen Dank für den schwungvollen Auftakt. Nach den fröhlichen Begrüßungen nun auch die traurige Nachricht. Gestern früh verstarb unser Kollege Emeritus Gerfried Hunold nach langer Krankheit im Alter von 84 Jahren. Seit 1981 bis zu seinem Eintritt in den Ruhestand 2004 war er Lehrstuhlinhaber für theologische Ethik und als solcher direkter Nachfolger Alfons Auers. Wo also könnte ein besserer Ort sein, seiner zu gedenken, als gerade jetzt und gerade hier? In seiner Lehre wie in seinen Veröffentlichungen stellte sich Gerfried Hunold der Verantwortung für eine Welt für morgen. Interdisziplinarität erhob er explizit zum Ethos seines Wissenschaftsverständnisses. Besonders intensiv wandte er sich ethischen Fragen der Humangenetik und Embryonenforschung zu. Und dankbar erinnern wir uns seiner Gesprächsfähigkeit und Bereitschaft weit über seine Emeritierung hinaus und seines oft großherzigen Engagements für unsere Fakultät als Ganze. An appreciative commemoration for our colleague Gerfried Hunold, Alfons Auer's successor, who passed away yesterday. Dear all, liebe Gäste, liebe Freunde und Bekannte von Alfons Auer, liebe Studierende, Kolleginnen und Kollegen. Wenn die Katholisch-Theologische Fakultät in Tübingen heute zum 4. Mal den Alfons Auer Ethik-Preis verleiht, dann tut sie das nicht einfach nur, um an Auer zu erinnern. Es geht uns vielmehr um jene Art und Weise der zeitgenössischen, mutigen Aktualisierung des christlichen Ethos, für das der Name Alfons Auer steht. Was wollen wir erreichen mit dieser Preisverleihung? Wozu wollen wir uns bekennen? Awarding the Alfons Auer Ethik-Preis today for the 4th time, it is not simply to commemorate Auer. Rather, it's about the kind of contemporary, courageous actualization of the Christian ethos for which the name Alfons Auer stands. What do we want to express with this award as a faculty of Catholic theology? First of all, a theology that learns not only to advocate for the marginalized, but to hear them and to live a common cause with them. Eine Theologie, die lernt, nicht nur für Marginalisierte einzutreten, sondern sie zu hören und mit ihnen zusammen einen Common Cause, etwas gemeinsam Wichtiges zu leben. In diesem Sinne will Leela Gandhi das koloniale Archiv neu lesen. Es geht um die Zusammengehörigkeit derer, die marginalisiert werden in den Gesellschaften der Kolonisierten und der Kolonisierer. Es geht um eine gemeinsame Auseinandersetzung mit institutionalisiertem Leid. In her own words, again, in a sensitive reading of the colonial archive, we must begin by recognizing the oppressed or marginalized selves as civilizational allies in the battle against institutionalized suffering, thus quoting Ashish Nandi. Hinzu kommt, dem Leid Raum zu geben, das mit der Erfahrung der Überlegenheit der anderen verbunden ist. Perfectionism for the have-nots is a more strenuous affair than for the haves. It entails the transcendence of the pain resulting from the state of helpless confinement to the handicaps and burdens of their given circumstances. The poorest person achieves the common good through the discovery of shame. Ich deute nur an, welche Aufgabe für Theologie und Kirche damit verbunden wäre und welches Maß an Selbstkritik. I'm only hinting at the task this would entail for theology and the churches, and the degree of self-criticism. Ein zweites, das uns wichtig ist, gegen das ethisch, religiös und akademisch Elitäre vorzugehen. Against the ethically, religiously and academically elitist. Denn auch die Theologie ist nicht frei davon, sich alles das zuzuschreiben, was Leela Gandhi am neoliberalen Perfectionism beobachtet. The cultivation of rank, purity, excellence, strength and so forth. Es sind auch akademische Mechanismen, die uns diese Unterscheidung nahelegen. In diesem Sinne spricht Leela Gandhi von einer ordinary language, auch in den Wissenschaften. Ordinary means common, current, colloquial, in the tongue of every man and every woman. To use a language which avoids technical terms or artificial symbolisms of lawyers, theologians, economists, philosophers, and, as you ironically added, and players of royal tennis. In this way, your aim is a project of inclusivity, the art of the unmanifest, the non-value, the history of non-sovereignty, non-violence, non-injuriousness, Nicht-Gewalt, Nicht-Verletzung, imperfectionness. To be ordinary, and that's my last quotation, to be ordinary is to derive our meanings from strictly communicative, shared, and common contexts. The situation of the speaker, the occasion of a word, the sudden surprise of intimate understanding. That is what I hope for this evening. The surprise of understanding, die Überraschung der Verständigung. In diesem Sinne seien Sie uns alle herzlich willkommen.
Dear Professor Gandhi, sehr geehrter Herr Domkapitular Scharfenegger, sehr geehrter Herr Weishaupt, distinguished guests. It is my great pleasure to welcome you here today to the award ceremony of the Alfons Auer Ethik-Preis 2022. This evening, we are able to celebrate a truly special occasion. The Alfons Auer Ethik-Preis and this year's award in particular are not only an asset to our university, but are also of great significance to society overall. Climate change, pandemics, war, and consequently heavy loss in biodiversity, steadily dropping water levels, a severe global food crisis, a sharp increase in global poverty, and the displacement of millions of people, these are only some of the challenges we encounter today. In the face of recent developments in our globalized world, political, philosophical, but also theological reflections towards an ethical awareness have become more crucial than ever. Universities are places of research and teaching and have a special responsibility in this respect. Tübingen has long recognized this and set out to expand its social commitment and to promote global awareness. Under the motto, research, relevance, responsibility, this even became a key pillar in the university's overall strategy, which enabled the university to achieve excellent status in 2012. I'm wondering whether Professor Engler is here, my distinguished predecessor. It was under his leadership that the university implemented this focus on relevance and responsibility, and with great success. As a professor of classics and theology myself, I am delighted that special attention has also been paid to the theologies. Over the past few years, a marvelous environment for interdisciplinary collaboration has been created here in Tübingen. Today, We do not only have the Global Ethic Institute, the Weltethos-Institut, that promotes the reflection on unifying values within cultural, ideological, and religious diversity worldwide, and which, thanks to the generosity of the Global Ethic Foundation, the Stiftung Weltethos, is associated with the university. Within the framework of the Excellence Initiative, the university also established a research platform that brings together scholars from the theologies, social sciences, and humanities to examine the dynamics and effects of global encounters. Recently, a Center for Religion, Culture, and Society was inaugurated, which serves to connect scholars to explore religious, cultural, secular, and societal interrelations. And soon, we will be able to unite our three theologies on our shared campus of theologies, den Campus der Theologien. The theological disciplines are undoubtedly predestined by their very nature to contribute to awareness-building processes in society. The theologies here in Tübingen, however, are especially well situated and active in this respect. The biennial Alfons Auer Prize, awarded by the Faculty of Catholic Theology, is another great example of how such awareness-building processes are given international visibility at our university. A special thank you goes to the person whose sponsorship has made this special occasion possible. Sehr geehrter Herr Weishaupt, on behalf of the University of Tübingen, I would like to thank you most warmly for your generous and most gracious support. Durch die Stiftung dieses Preises halten Sie nicht nur die Erinnerung an einen von Deutschlands distinguiertesten Theologen des 20. Jahrhunderts wach. Darüber hinaus demonstrieren Sie durch diesen Preis auch auf wahrhaft außergewöhnliche Weise, dass soziales Engagement und Verpflichtung, besonders in Bezug auf Ethik, eine lange Tradition und große Bedeutung für Unternehmer in Baden-Württemberg haben. Ganz herzlichen Dank dafür. This year's award goes to a person with a truly exceptional ethical commitment in the academic field. Dear Professor Gandhi, esteemed colleague, we are delighted that you decided to accept this award. It is a great honor that you have traveled all the way to Tübingen. Since we are about to hear a laudatory speech in your honor by Professor Auger, and it's a great pleasure meeting you, and thank you so much for coming to Tübingen to speak in honor of Professor Gandhi, I refrain from further comments. Let me just say, we may expect a highly interesting lecture. In a time when democratic systems, liberally negotiated ways of life, and the international peace order are threatened, as they have not been for a long time, postcolonial studies are more valuable than ever. They do not only produce knowledge about the so-called other and allow us to see the world from a different angle. They also question what knowledge about ourselves we might derive from this. They offer a means to create awareness of the persistence of imperialist concepts and knowledge production processes in today's world. And they challenge us to reflect on how these concepts may be involved in contemporary social, political, and military conflicts. Deconstructing such concepts can enrich peace and conflict studies. Dear guests, as you can see, a truly enlightening and stimulating evening awaits us, and I personally look greatly forward to hearing more about Professor Gandhi's work. First, however, we will have the pleasure to hear more about the namesake of the prize, Alfons Auer. Sehr geehrter Herr Professor Miek, danke schön, dass Sie das für uns heute tun werden. Die Bühne gehört Ihnen. Herzlichen Dank.
Honorable Laureate Professor Gandhi, Magnificenza, Spectabilis, it's a pleasure for me to use these very old terms for the President and also for the Dean. Dear donor of the award, Siegfried Weishaupt, distinguished guests and participants, dear all, as the Dean says. As a former collaborator and later on as a colleague of the namesake of this award, Professor Alfons Auer, I take the opportunity, as usual, to commemorate his person in honor of this ceremony. Professor Alfons Auer lived between 1915 and 2005. I think there's a picture of him. So you can see him when he was 80 years old. He was born and grew up in a small village in the highlands of Württemberg called Schöneburg. And there the second picture shows the commemoration of his person on the central square of this village. So he came from the Swabian province and later, as a priest, became a professor at the universities of Würzburg and then for a long time of Tübingen. Tübingen, as is known, is not a big city, but from Tübingen come famous names of philosophers who are remembered among the locals, even in the surrounding villages, under the slightly mocking motto, der Schelling und der Hegel, die sind bei uns die Regel. Schelling and Hegel, they are the rule with us. In the middle of Alfons Auer's ethical, theological work, we find the word world. Auer, stemming from the Swabian province, emphasized in his books the world, that Christians shall be open to this world. More than 60 years ago by now, in 1961, he published the book Weltoffener Christ, Openness to the World, had for him the meaning openness to the secular experiences, not only to the closed religious traditions. Almost 3 decades later, our colleague Hans Küng, and we supported him, presented his proposal for a world ethics, Weltethos, in which he emphasized the role of interreligious dialogue in promoting ethical principles universally. Business is certainly global. The society of our prize generous donator is also global. But world, in Professor Auer's ethical sense, did not mean global. It implies the secular enlightenment of the ethical. Religion must no longer insist on their supposed moral superiority, but have to accept the constructive experience of secular approaches to ethics. And globalization is not always the right answer to the problems of the world. In 1971, 10 years after his book on Weltoffenheit, Openness to the World, Professor Auer published his book on Autonomous Ethics and Christian Faith, Autonome Ethik und christlicher Glaube, is republished in 2018. In this book, he emphasized the willingness of religion to learn from new secular experiences and not to impose on the rest of the world a colonial practice of Christianity. European social, religious, and ethical traditions have informed the colonial practice of the world. If we follow Alfons Auer, we will not see world in a merely global perspective, but we can understand world in a more differentiated and pluralistic way, accepting social developments of very different worlds. Words then has different ethical connotations. Secular is connoted with the signs of the time. Societal ethically invokes the principle of a decent, that is, a fair and just society. We all live in a specific interrelationship with our different worlds. I have taken now the opportunity here to acknowledge the openness of the Swabian province to the world, represented by my teacher, global reflections on new challenges of new critical theories. We all emphasize today the importance of these postcolonial theories for ethics, and we are all eager to hear more about it today from Professor Gandhi, who is being honored with this award today. Thank you.
It's a great honor and pleasure for me to speak here today. I'm moved that the postcolonial thinker, Professor Leela Gandhi, at the Venerable University of Tübingen is receiving the Alfons Auer Ethics Award 2022 today. The political context of Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine, the nuclear threat, but also the situation in our societies, churches and faith communities call for a deeper ethical reflection with new approaches. Approaches of non-violence and inclusive community are urgently needed. For the epistemological context, it is surprising, yet imminent important, that resistant, dissident, post-colonial thinking is appreciated. The laureate is not only an excellent connoisseur of postcolonial theory, but also decisively contributes to the development of postcolonial and post-secular theory in the context of religion and gender and conceptualizes a new ethics. Es ist für mich eine große Ehre und Freude, heute hier sprechen zu dürfen. Ich bin berührt, dass heute die postkoloniale Denkerin Professor Leela Gandhi an der ehrwürdigen Universität Tübingen den Alfons Auer Ethik-Preis 2022 erhält. Der politische Kontext des Angriffskrieges Russlands auf die Ukraine, die atomare Bedrohung, aber auch die Situation in unseren Gesellschaften, Kirchen und Glaubensgemeinschaften rufen zwingend nach einem vertieften ethischen Nachdenken mit neuen Ansätzen. Ansätze von Nichtgewalt und inklusiver Gemeinschaft werden dringend benötigt. Für den epistemologischen Kontext ist es überraschend, jedoch eminent wichtig, dass widerständiges, dissidentisches, postkoloniales Denken gewürdigt wird. Die Preisträgerin ist nicht nur eine ausgezeichnete Kennerin der postkolonialen Theorie, sondern entwickelt die postkoloniale sowie postsäkulare Theorie im Kontext von Religion und Geschlechterforschung entscheidend mit und konzeptualisiert eine neue Ethik. Leela Gandhi is John Hawkes Professor of Humanities and English and Director of the Pembroke Center for Teaching and Research on Women. She was born in Mumbai, the great-granddaughter of freedom fighter Mohandas Karamchand Mahatma Gandhi. She received her BA from Delhi University, her MPhil and DPhil from Oxford University. Before coming to Brown University, she taught at the University of Chicago, Delhi University and La Trobe University. Gandhi is co-editor of the journal Postcolonial Studies and a member of the editorial board of Postcolonial Text. She's a senior fellow at Cornell University's School of Criticism and Theory. Gandhi is a literary and cultural theorist whose research focuses on transnational literatures, postcolonial theory and ethics, and 19th and 20th century intellectual history. She also published several collections of poetry. Leela Gandhi ist John Hawkes Professor für Geisteswissenschaften und Englisch und Direktorin des Pembroke Center for Teaching and Research on Women. Sie wurde in Mumbai als Urenkelin des Freiheitskämpfers Mohandas Karamchand Mahatma Gandhi geboren. Sie erhielt ihren BA von der Universität Delhi, ihren MPhil und DPhil von der Universität Oxford. Bevor sie zur Brown University kam, lehrte sie an der University of Chicago, der Delhi University und der La Trobe University. Gandhi ist Mitherausgeberin der Zeitschrift Postcolonial Studies und Mitglied des Redaktionsausschusses von Postcolonial Text. Sie ist Senior Fellow an der School of Criticism and Theory der Cornell University. Gandhi ist Literatur- und Kulturtheoretikerin, deren Schwerpunkte auf transnationalen Literaturen, postkolonialer Theorie und Ethik sowie der Geistesgeschichte des 19. und 20. Jahrhunderts liegt. Sie veröffentlichte auch mehrere Gedichtesammlungen. When Leela Gandhi wrote the first edition of her book, Introduction to Postcolonial Theory, it was only an emergent field. Early postcolonial theory showed the limitations of Eurocentrism. It was an adjunct to critical theory. It had its own language and methodology and emerged in the literature departments and mostly comparative Anglo-Saxon literature. Als Leela Gandhi die Arbeit an der ersten Ausgabe ihres Buches Einführung in die postkoloniale Theorie schrieb, war dieses erst ein emergierendes Feld. Frühe postkoloniale Theorie zeigte die Limitierung des Eurozentrismus. Es war ein Zusatz zur kritischen Theorie. Sie hatte eine eigene Sprache und Methodologie und war entstanden in den Literaturabteilungen meist komparativer angelsächsischer Literatur. Wir erinnern uns an den Slogan "The Empire Writes Back". Early postcolonial theory grew out of contemporary poststructuralism and postmodernism mainly, and was directed variously against grand narratives. The figures of the subject, disciplinary objects such as literature, text, history, archive, philosophy, canons of all descriptions, nationalisms, both colonial and postcolonial, class, reason and rationality, progress and modernity, gender. Professor Gandhi, I quote, "While the publication of Said's Orientalism in 1978 is commonly regarded as a principal catalyst and reference point for postcolonial theory, insufficient attention is given to the fact that this Urtext evolved within a distinctly poststructuralist climate, dominated by the figures of Foucault and Derrida. Indeed, Said's own work draws upon a variety of Foucauldian paradigms. In particular, Foucault's notion of discourse informs Said's Orientalism. A lot of postcolonial theory developed in exchange between poststructuralism, postmodernism and Marxism until today." Die frühe postkoloniale Theorie erwuchs vor allem aus dem zeitgenössischen Poststrukturalismus und der Postmoderne und richtete sich in unterschiedlicher Weise gegen große Erzählungen, die Figuren des Subjekts, disziplinäre Objekte wie Literatur, Text, Geschichte, Archiv, Philosophien, Kanonis aller Art, Nationalismen, sowohl koloniale als auch postkoloniale, Klasse, Vernunft und Rationalität, Fortschritt und Modernität, Geschlecht. Professor Gandhi unterstreicht, und damit ist sie nur einige, die das nachdrücklich tun, während die Veröffentlichung von Said's Orientalism im Jahre 1978 gemeinhin als wichtigster Katalysator und Bezugspunkt für die postkoloniale Theorie angesehen wird, wird der Tatsache, dass sich dieser Urtext in einem eindeutigen poststrukturalistischen Klima entwickelte, das von den Figuren Foucault und Derrida dominiert wurde, nicht genügend Aufmerksamkeit geschenkt. In der Tat stützt sich Saids eigenes Werk auf eine Vielzahl von Foucault'schen Paradigmen. Insbesondere Foucaults Begriff des Diskurses bildet die Grundlage für Saids Orientalismus. Im Austausch zwischen Poststrukturalismus, Postmoderne und Marxismus entwickelte sich ein Großteil der postkolonialen Theorie. This understanding of the connection between power, knowledge and truth production and the insight that knowledge is always discursively produced is fundamental to Professor Gandhis work. Dieses Verständnis des Zusammenhangs zwischen Macht, Wissens- und Wahrheitsproduktion und die Einsicht, dass Wissen immer diskursiv hergestellt wird, ist grundlegend in Professor Gandhis Arbeit. In Culture and Imperialism, Said concedes that Orientalism fails to theorize adequately the resistance of the non-European. In the context of the gendered subaltern, Spivak's famous essay, Can the Subaltern Speak, needs to be mentioned. Spivak elaborates contesting representational systems which violently displace silence the figure of the gendered subaltern. Where Spivak speaks about women, Professor Gandhi moves forward. She is committed to rethinking the colonial encounter and aspects of constructions of hegemonic masculinity. Here we find a collection of protests against violent colonial masculinity. There's a critique reaching from Oscar Wilde and Mahatma Gandhi to Virginia Woolf's delineation of androgyny. Mahatma Gandhi's radical self-fashioning gives femaleness an equal share in the making of anti-colonial subjectivity. So, also by refusing to partake in the logic of colonial sexual binaries. In Culture and Imperialism räumt Said ein, dass der Orientalismus es nicht schafft, den Widerstand der außereuropäischen Welt angemessen zu theoretisieren. Im Zusammenhang mit der geschlechtsspezifischen Subaltern muss Spivaks berühmter Aufsatz Kann die Subalterne sprechen erwähnt werden. Spivak arbeitet die Anfechtung von Repräsentationssystemen heraus, die die Figur der geschlechtlichen Subalternen gewaltsam verdrängen bzw. zum Schweigen bringen. Jedoch, wo Spivak über Frauen spricht, bewegt sich Leela Gandhi weiter und setzt sich dafür ein, die koloniale Begegnung unter Aspekten der Konstruktion hegemonialer Männlichkeit neu zu überdenken. Hier finden wir eine Sammlung von Protesten gegen die gewalttätige koloniale Männlichkeit. Die Kritik reicht von Oscar Wilde und Mahatma Gandhi zu Virginia Woolfs Beschreibung von Androgynität. Und Mahatma Gandhis radikale Selbstgestaltung gibt Weiblichkeit einen gleichberechtigten Anteil an der Herstellung antikolonialer Subjektivität, indem er sich weigert, an der Logik der kolonialen sexuellen Binaritäten teilzunehmen. As central theme, Professor Gandhi suggests to reconsider the term minor, as suggested by Deleuze and Guattari. They appreciate minor as deterritorialized discourse, as shown in the influential study Kafka towards a minor literature. They point to non-national literatures or non-nationalism. These discourses inhere in point of non-culture, linguistic third world zones, by which a language escapes an assemblage comes into play. Als zentrales Thema schlägt Professor Gandhi vor, den Begriff minor im Sinne von Deleuze und Guattari zu überdenken. Sie schätzen minor als deterritorialisierte Diskurse, wie sie in ihrer einflussreichen Studie Kafka Towards a Minor Literature zeigen. Sie verweisen auch auf nicht-nationale Literatur oder Nicht-Nationalismus. Diese Diskurse befinden sich in Punkten der Nichtkultur, in sprachlichen Zonen der Dritten Welt, durch die eine Sprache entweicht, eine Assemblage ins Spiel kommt. At the end of the first issue, the critique of what postcolonial theory has not done sufficiently so far leads to the beginnings of an ethics oriented towards non-violence in the sense of Mahatma Gandhi. The postcolonial critique of Western historiography must ask even more comprehensively who does not appear in the historiography. With Ashish Nandi, these are the non-players of history. Unfortunately, the frequent postcolonial blanking out of the non-players, Western and non-Western, ignores those countless unrecorded histories of affect, conversation, and meditation. In other words, histories of what Mahatma Gandhi calls ahimsa or non-violence. Am Ende der ersten Ausgabe führt die Kritik an dem, was die postkoloniale Theorie bisher nicht genügend geleistet hat, zu den Ansätzen einer Ethik, die im Sinne Mahatma Gandhis auf Nichtgewalt ausgerichtet ist. Die postkoloniale Kritik an der westlichen Geschichtsschreibung muss noch umfassender fragen, wer in der Geschichtsschreibung nicht vorkommt. Mit Ashish Nandi sind diese Nichtspieler der Geschichte zu nennen. Unglücklicherweise ignoriert die häufige postkoloniale Ausblendung der Nichtspieler westlich und nicht westlich jene zahllosen, nicht aufgezeichneten Geschichten von Affekten, Konversation und Meditation. Mit anderen Worten, Geschichten dessen, was Mahatma Gandhi Ahimsa oder Gewaltlosigkeit nennt. This book, Affective Communities, challenges homogeneous portrayals of the world. Leela Gandhi documents the anti-imperial affiliations in politics of certain marginalized subcultures in the late 19th century Britain and Europe. She analyzes the hitherto neglected history of Western anti-imperialism, focusing on individuals and groups who renounce the privileges and imperialism to elect affinity with victims of their own expansionist cultures. She uncovers the utopia socialist critiques of empire that emerged in Europe, specifically in Britain, at the end of the 19th century. She shows for the first time how those associated with marginalized lifestyles, subcultures, and traditions, including homosexuality, vegetarianism, animal rights, spiritualism, and aestheticism, unite against imperialism and forget and forged strong bonds with colonized subjects and cultural contexts. Drawing on Derrida's theory of friendship, Gandhi puts forward a powerful new mode of the political, one that finds it in friendship a crucial resource for anti-imperialism and transnational collaboration. Affective Communities stellt homogene Darstellung der Welt in Frage. Leela Gandhi dokumentiert die anti-imperialen Zugehörigkeiten und die Politik bestimmter marginalisierter Subkulturen in Großbritannien des späten 19. Jahrhunderts. Sie analysiert die bisher vernachlässigte Geschichte des westlichen Antiimperialismus. Sie konzentriert sich auf Einzelpersonen und Gruppen, die auf die Privilegien des Imperialismus verzichten, um sich mit den Opfern ihrer eigenen Expansionskulturen neu zu solidarisieren, und deckt die utopisch-sozialistische Kritik am Imperium auf. Sie zeigt zum ersten Mal, wie diejenigen, die mit marginalisierten Lebensstilen, Subkulturen und Traditionen in Verbindung gebracht wurden, darunter Homosexualität, Vegetarismus, Tierrechte, Spiritualismus und Ästhetizismus, sich gegen den Imperialismus verbünden und starke Bindungen zu kolonisierten Subjekten und kulturellen Kontexten aufbauten. Unter Rückgriff auf Derridas Theorie der Freundschaft entwirft Gandhi eine neue, kraftvolle Form des Politischen. Eine, die in der Freundschaft eine entscheidende Ressource für Antiimperialismus und transnationale Zusammenarbeit sieht. Professor Gandhi brings together a number of South Asian and European friendships that flourished between 1878 and 1914, including figures like Oscar Wilde and Oxford undergraduate Mahatma Gandhi, the English socialist and homosexual reformer Edward Carpenter, and the young Indian barrister Mahatma Gandhi, or the Jewish French mystic Mira al-Fassa and the Indian yogi Sri Aurobindo. In uncovering the stories of minor historical agents, Gandhi also takes on with precision a great number of controversies about ethics and politics within postcolonial studies, philosophy and critical theory. Exploring in depth the legacy of Kant, Hegel, Marx, Foucault, and Derrida, among others, she goes back and forth between theoretical exegesis and historical occurrence to show how each illuminates the other in regard to the central question of what form a dissident politics might take. One of the overarching goals of Gandhi's project, then, is to point to the possibility of resistance at the heart of the empire and across its territories, a goal whose contemporary urgency she makes clear by elucidating the continuities between 19th century empire and Negri's use of the word to describe global forms of power today. Leela Gandhi bringt eine Reihe von südasiatischen und europäischen Freundschaften zusammen, die zwischen 1878 und 1914 blühten. Darunter Figuren wie Oscar Wilde und der Oxford-Student Manmohan Ghose, der englische Sozialist und homosexuelle Reformer Edward Carpenter und der junge indische Anwalt Gandhi, oder die jüdische französische Mystikerin Mira al-Fassa und der indische Yogi Sri Aurobindo. Indem sie die Geschichten kleinerer historischer Akteure aufdeckt, nimmt sich Gandhi mit Können auch eine große Anzahl von Kontroversen über Ethik und Politik innerhalb der postkolonialen Studien, Philosophie und kritischen Theorie an. Indem sie sich unter anderem mit dem Erbe von Kant, Hegel, Marx, Foucault und Derrida auseinandersetzt, wechselt sie zwischen theoretischer Exegese und historischer Darstellung hin und her, um zu zeigen, wie das eine das andere erhält. Wenn es um die zentrale Frage geht, welche Form eine dissidentische Politik annehmen könnte. Eines der übergreifenden Ziele von Gandhis Projekt ist es also, auf die Möglichkeit des Widerstands im Herzen des Imperiums und seinen Territorien hinzuweisen. Ein Ziel, dessen zeitgenössische Dringlichkeit sie verdeutlicht, indem sie die Kontinuitäten zwischen dem Imperium des 19. Jahrhunderts und Hart und Negris Verwendung des Wortes zur Beschreibung globaler Machtformen heute aufzeigt. Another of her undertakings is to reclaim fin de siècle utopian socialism and its myriad connections to anti-colonial thought, from the dustbins of history to which, she argues, it had been ingloriously consigned by the beginning of the 20th century. Critiques ranging from Max Nordau to Engels and Lenin and later Orwell dismissed utopian politics as immature. But it is precisely this immaturity, Gandhi contends, that makes utopianism politically potent. Unadmissible to the mechanisms of modern forms of power and teleological historical narrative, the immature politics that she celebrates posit a radical inclusiveness because of their intransigence in the face of all structure, law, axiom, and generality. Utopian thought, an embrace of impossibility and a refusal of the given, serves as a crucial antidote to the strictures and exclusions of what Gandhi calls, after Foucault, governmentality. Ein weiteres Anliegen der Autorin ist es, den utopischen Sozialismus des 4. Siècle und seine vielfältigen Verbindungen zum antikolonialen Denken aus dem Mülleimer der Geschichte zu holen, indem ihrer Meinung nach zu Beginn des 20. Jahrhunderts dieser unrühmlich verbannt worden war. Kritiker von Max Nordau über Engels und Lenin bis hin zu Orwell taten die utopische Politik als unreif ab. Doch gerade diese Unreife, so Gandhi, macht den Utopismus politisch wirksam. Unangepasst an die Mechanismen moderner Machtformen und theologischer Geschichtsnarrative postulieren die von ihr gefeierten unreifen Politiken eine radikale Inklusivität aufgrund ihrer Unnachgiebigkeit gegenüber allen Strukturen, Gesetzen, Axiomen und Allgemeinheiten. Utopisches Denken, eine Umarmung der Unmöglichkeit und eine Verweigerung des Gegebenen dient als entscheidendes Gegenmittel zu den Einschränkungen und Ausschlüssen dessen, was Gandhi nach Foucault Gouvernementalität nennt. In the chapter Meat, which deals with animal welfare, Leela Gandhi brings together Donna Haraway's work with Mahatma Gandhi's thought, delving into Donna Haraway's Cyborg Manifesto to argue that rich anti-colonial possibilities accrue from ethically informed reassessment of human-animal sociality. She traces the links between British vegetarian and animal welfare movements and the evolution of Mahatma Gandhi's revolutionary ideals, specifically those of ahimsa, non-violent passive resistance, and Swarai, self-rule. The chapter moves from the story of the young Gandhi studies in London to the warm, welcome, like-mindedness he discovered in vegetarian circles, then sojourns into history of Victorian animal welfare ideology to show how early animal rights rhetoric, heavily influenced by Jeremy Bentham and Mill, was in league with the colonial imperatives of utilitarian philosophy. Fin de siècle dissidents, Leela Gandhi argues, positioned themselves against the paternalism endemic to the utilitarian agenda by coupling animal welfare to socialist and anti-colonial aims. In doing so, they created a platform for an enlightened model of anarchic, disobedient, and paradigmatically non-governmental sociality, entirely compatible with and influential for Mahatma Gandhi's involving ideals of anti-colonial resistance. Im Kapitel Meat, das sich mit dem Tierschutz befasst, bringt Leela Gandhi das Werk von Donna Haraway mit dem Denken von Mahatma Gandhi zusammen. Indem sie sich mit Donna Haraways Cyborg Manifesto auseinandersetzt, um zu argumentieren, dass aus ethisch informierten Neubewertungen der Mensch-Tier-Sozialität reiche antikoloniale Möglichkeiten erwachsen, zeichnet sie die Verbindung zwischen den britischen Vegetarier- und Tierschutzbewegungen und der Entwicklung von Mahatma Gandhis revolutionären Idealen nach, insbesondere jenen von Ahimsa, gewaltloser passiver Widerstand, und Swarai, Selbstbestimmung. Das Kapitel bewegt sich von der Geschichte der Studien des jungen Gandhi in London zu der herzlichen Aufnahme und unter Gleichgesinnten in vegetarischen Kreisen und macht einen Abstecher in die Geschichte der viktorianischen Tierschutzideologie, um zu zeigen, wie die frühe Tierrechtsrhetorik, die stark von Jeremy Bentham und Mill beeinflusst war, mit den kolonialen Imperativen der utilitaristischen Philosophie im Bunde stand. Die Dissidenten des Fin de siècle, so argumentiert Leela Gandhi, positionierten sich gegen den Paternalismus, der für die utilitaristische Agenda typisch war, indem sie den Tierschutz mit sozialistischen und antikolonialen Zielen verbanden. Auf diese Weise schufen sie eine Plattform für ein aufgeklärtes Modell anarchischer, ungehorsamer und paradigmatisch nichtstaatlicher Sozialität, das mit dem sich entwickelten Idealen des antikolonialen Widerstands von Mahatma Gandhi völlig kompatibel und für diese einflussreich war. In the chapter called God, Mysticism and the Radicalism at the End of the 19th Century, brings Gandhi a novel perspective to contemporary debates about the role of religion in modern political life. Identifying Kant as the origin of a modern secular ethics that denies the moral subject access to all external influences, human, physical, divine, Gandhi argues for the ethical value of the mongrelization of subjectivity that forms of religion entail. While many postcolonial writers, such as Salman Rushdie or Gayatri Spivak, privilege the material conditions of modern life rather than a metaphysical realm as a basis for self-prioritization, Gandhi positions the openness to otherness evident in the rhetoric and practices of the 20th century mystics as a salutary reminder of religion's utopian potential. The connecting thread of the kings of the kinds of politics that she valorizes in each of her chapters is a willingness to risk not just exile, the condemnation of one's political community, but self-exile, the possible transformation or loss of one's subjectivity in relation to the other. Spiritualism articulated just this kind of openness to indeterminate transformation, she argues, and it emerged at a time when it was able to wrest the concept of multiple personality from abnormal psychology and deliver it to ethics. In dem Kapitel mit dem Titel Gott bringt Gandhi eine neue Perspektive in die zeitgenössischen Debatten über die Rolle der Religion im modernen politischen Leben ein, indem sie Kant als den Ursprung einer modernen, säkularen Ethik identifiziert, die dem moralischen Subjekt den Zugang zu allen äußeren Einflüssen verweigert, menschlichen, physischen und göttlichen, argumentiert Gandhi für den ethischen Wert der Vermischung von Subjektivität, die einige Formen der Religion mit sich bringen. Und sie geht hier über diejenigen hinaus, die wie Salman Rushdie oder Gayatri Spivak die materialen Bedingungen des modernen Lebens und nicht einen metaphysischen Bereich als Grundlage bevorzugen. In The Common Cause, Leela Gandhi describes the common cause as follows. One, a lack of significance in individual high or low values, and second, an objective shared with others, with another person or group. She criticizes opinions from the vanguard of Euro-American life has fostered this view that democracy is uniquely Western, property and inheritance. Dominant Western players in the New World Order regularly condoned violent territorial intervention in its name. The book Common Cause asserts a global provenance for democracy. The world has seen numerous non-Western experiments in democratic politics. Many of them have been autochthonous. Anti-colonial movements have included democracy in their revolutionary agendas by combining demands for universal enfranchisement with those of independence. This, according to Leela Gandhi, concerns the inner life of democracy. She argues that the global disposition of democracy as an affect or attitude of infinite inclusivity or as an predicating the interconnection of self and world was intensified by an ethical turn in the transnational scene of the early 20th century political thought, itself born of colonial encounter. In this milieu, the concept of ethics had obtained a ubiquitous and not always good application. No longer the denomination for right and wrong or for good and bad behaviors merely, it came to designate all projects of disciplined self-work or ascesis when the acts of living achieved a collective resonance. Die Beschreibung für diese gemeinsame Ursache oder gemeinsame Sache sind einmal das Fehlen von Bedeutung in einzelnen oder hohen oder niedrigen Werten oder zweitens ein gemeinsames Ziel mit einer anderen Person oder Gruppe. She describes a moral incompleteness and imperfection as suitable ethics for democracy. And extremists, moderates, and radicals alike held subjective properties to be universal and projected self-cultivation as an occult work not just upon the self, but also upon others. And sie beschreibt diese moralische Unvollkommenheit als eine passende Ethik für die Demokratie. She illuminates an ethic of moral imperfection, a set of anti-colonial, anti-fascist practices devoted to the ordinariness and abnegation that ranged from doomed mutinies in the Indian military to Mahatma Gandhi's spiritual discipline. And at the end, I just would like to talk about the end of postcolonial studies, the new edition. The epilogue of the new edition deals with developments of the last 20 years. It revisits old disciplinary engagements and re-examines ideas from political and social theory, from post-secular and post-critical perspectives, and from ontological, ecological, ethical, and affective turns in the changing landscape of critical theory, and includes new alliances, especially with critical race theory and African postcolonialism, within an expanded archival framework, and encompasses the transnational circuits of non-Marxist socialism and many civil rights movements. Its aim is to describe what endures in postcolonial thought as a critical perspective within scholarship and as an attitude to the world that transcends the discipline of postcolonial studies. In the epilogue is called a manifest. It is called If There Were a Manifesto for Postcolonial Thinking, and it does have a playful form of a manifesto. She takes into account developments in the field and describes 7 subjections. She describes assemblage. Postcolonial thinking is made as heterogeneous element with no internal hierarchies of genre. Representation event, semiotic material theory practice. What we have instead is relations between symmetrical figures in the form, which differentiates names like assemblage, a network, or the Hindi word jugaad. Elements of postcolonial jugaad and assemblage are Western self-critique and anti-colonial liberation and planetarity. And she has a proposal 1. Postcolonial thinking and its assemblage or jugaad that favors intersectional description of anti-imperialism and anti-imperialism. And injury. Here she underlines with Foucault the shift of European conceptions of power in the 18th century, that the task of governments becomes the management of populations and people. And she has a proposal 2. Postcolonial thinking offers a reckoning with injured life and community of suffering or template for non-injuriousness as a way of life and basic community. Exit. Proposal 3. Postcolonial thinking can present an ethics of departure. Ontology. Proposal 4. Postcolonial thinking makes the displacement a means to devise non-generic connections with the world. Ethics 5. Receiving and providing refuge is a corollary of renunciation in postcolonial thinking. And in the end, she also has an advice to kings. There is always an end to domination. Postcolonial thinking is best as an imperfective outlook that remains indefinite, unfinished, and is peripatetic. And I come to a conclusion. With Leela Gandhi, postcolonial theory is not a great theory, it's a makeshift. Die Postkoloniale Theorie ist keine große Theorie, sie ist ein Provisorium, ein Behelf, eine Notlösung. Leela Gandhi's outstanding scholarly work is driven by an impulse toward disciplinary intersection and an interest in the overlapping legacies born of colonial encounters, especially transnational traditions of anti-imperial ethics. Her distinguished book, Postcolonial Theory, maps shifts in critical theory and philosophy, produced by the encounter between the West and non-West. In the distinguished affective communities, she examines the role of friendship between Western and non-Western dissidents in the formation of anti-colonial politics. Her renowned book, The Common Cause, Postcolonial Ethics and the Practice of Democracy, is about the concept of moral imperfection that lies behind many global and countercultural traditions of democracy. Leela Gandhis herausragende wissenschaftliche Arbeit wird von einem Impuls zu disziplinären Überschneidungen und einem Interesse an den sich überschneidenden Hinterlassenschaften kolonialer Begegnungen angetrieben und insbesondere von transnationalen Traditionen anti-imperialer Ethik. The Common Cause deprovincializes the history of democracy by exhuming and elaborating some of these assorted genealogies of mortal imperfection in the first half of the 20th century in the context of the Indo-British colonial encounter. The Common Cause entprovinzialisiert die Geschichte der Demokratie, indem es einige dieser verschiedenen Genealogien des tödlichen Imperfektionismus in der ersten Hälfte des 20. Jahrhunderts im Kontext der indisch-britischen kolonialen Bewegung herausarbeitet. Leela Gandhi conceptualizes an outstanding ethics of the notion of dissidence, minor, non-violent counter-discourses and practices, whereby she acknowledges the importance and spirituality and goes her own unique post-secular way. For all these achievements, she receives the Alfons Auer Ethik-Preis. Leela Gandhi entwickelt eine herausragende Ethik aus der Praxis des Dissidentischen, der minor, nicht gewaltvollen Gegendiskurse und Praxen. Dabei würdigt sie die Bedeutung von Spiritualität und beschreitet einen eigenen postsäkularen Weg. Für alle diese Errungenschaften erhält sie zu Recht den Alfons Auer Ethik-Preis. Congratulations.
So, this is the solemn moment. So I may now read and then present the charter on behalf of our faculty. The Faculty of Catholic Theology of the Eberhard Karls Universität Tübingen awards Professor Dr. Leela Gandhi the Alfons Auer Ethik-Preis of this year. Leela Gandhi is awarded the Alfons Auer Ethik-Preis for the inspiring ways in which her work transgresses the boundaries of disciplines, genres, cultures, in search of a shared aspiration for a non-injurious and uninjured life in an increasingly globalized world. Our warmest congratulations and greatest appreciation. Wonderful to have you here. Wonderful. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Dann kommen Sie doch direkt dazu. Okay. Tut mir leid, dass wir Ihnen den Rücken zudrehen. There are some flowers. There are some flowers indeed. So.
So I am somewhat overwhelmed, and I render my very profound thanks to President Carla Bollman, Dean Andreas Holsam, other wonderful members of the Catholic Theology faculty, some old friends, some new ones, Professor Moring Hesse, with whom I corresponded a great deal, and the Honourable Herr Siegfried Weishaupt. How wonderful it is to meet you, and thank you for your generosity and support. And Professor Ulrike Auger, for your incredible kindness and incredibly generous engagement with my work. This is not something that happens every day in the life of an ordinary scholar. So it's a day I will remember for the rest of my life. Thank you. And you are all here at this late hour. And you've invited me to share today some thoughts on problems and perspectives in post-colonial ethics. I apologize for overtaking this ceremony with English. Again, I apologize. And I thank you for your patience. Anyhow, my main claim about this topic today is this: that post-colonial ethics takes its best form as non-violence. Non-injuriousness is a better word for it. And in this form, it combines aspects of renunciation and surplus. So I will speak to this hypothesis under the following headings: ethics as such, what is meant by injury, ethics of renunciation, ethics of surplus. Time permitting, I'll tell you a story about Valmiki, the poet-author of the ancient Indian epic Ramayana. Ethics as such. The concept ethics in post-colonial ethics, as I take it, is not a property of this or that culture or tradition. It's something transacted across the colonial divide, and it incorporates elements of contestation and collaboration. So in my own research, paradoxically, I was drawn to ethics as a way to describe something unique in post-colonial contexts because of its remarkable instability and availability to contradictory uses actually in the Western tradition. In an Aristotelian conception, for instance, ethics is the precursor to the settled, highly complex political life of citizens in an organized state. It joins sciences such as the art of war, property management, public speaking. But at the opposite end of the spectrum, In the same tradition, it's favored by modern anarchist thinkers like Peter Kropotkin. As a name for practices of mutual aid in everyday life that expose the redundancy of the state itself, you know, and as something that's more of an atavism that's available to conditions of life in a natural environment, rather than a formal science or discipline that you should carefully acquire and cultivate. There are other examples. So, for example, ethics is taken, much like language and rationality, as a speciesistic property of the human. You know, something that distinguishes human and natural worlds. Yet many 19th century European animal rights thinkers, such as the lovely Élisée Reclus, saw ethics as a property of planetary cohabitation, including adaptive human-animal coexistence. If ethics is a form of therapeutics that allows emperors, such as Marcus Aurelius, to return day after day, newly energized for the violent machinations of power, it is the parrhesia by which Epicurean and skeptic ascetics, such as Diogenes Laertius, speak truth to power. If ethics is the mean whereby we establish life in communities of likeness, like the family or the nation, it belongs no less to the non-reproductive sociality of friendship. So on. The examples are legion. When we are attentive to such inconsistencies in the Western ethical tradition, it becomes clear that here there's a type of ethics that is more concerned with destabilizing than with foundation building, with critique rather than with law. How can we not think here of Socrates' beautiful account of his daimon in Apology, a paragon of ethical consciousness? This daimon encourages skepticism, not certainty. It only says no to Socrates. It only says no. It stops him from completing the smallest tasks and keeps him in a state of imperfection. But being hindered in this way, being thwarted from actualization, makes a life good in Socrates' estimation. He says, this sign, this is the surprise I've had ever since I was a child. It's a voice that comes to me and always forbids me to do something that I'm going to do, but it never commands me to do anything. Now, I've long believed that such properties of destabilization and critique are at the crux of Western anti-imperialism. A very important tradition, Western anti-imperialism. They allow for a decathexis, let's call it, a detachment from fixed identities and fixed positions, white, black, religion, magic, modern, primitive, history, non-history. And also from, we all have it, attachment to established privileges of race, development, wealth, gender, to name just a few. Now here's the hard part. In my own work, I've actually looked really hard for an equivalent daimonic form of ethics in non-Western contexts for post-colonial thought, something imperfective, no-saying, and critical. It's very hard to find. You know, there are plenty of examples in these non-Western contexts of foundational and prohibitive forms of moral law, prescribing hard and fast rules for the preservation of hierarchies, telling women what to do and not to do, regulating forms of sexuality, setting strict terminal boundaries of caste and religion and ethnicity. But if you look hard enough, and you have to look hard enough, you can find in these non-Western contexts as well, outside of the anti-colonial nation state, you know, you can find minor and dissident forms of ethics that open up a kind of, let's call it a zone of uncertainty in times of crisis, including the crisis of colonial encounter. And this, as far as I am concerned, is the promise of ethics as such. One example comes indeed from M.K. Gandhi's autobiography. He wrote this book between 1925 and 1929 after a 2-year prison sentence for various civil disobedience campaigns against the imperial government in India. So he had a lot of time to write an autobiography. Now, according to Gandhi, ethics, or the sphere of morals, he calls it, is something fungible and malleable, shape-shifting. It does not have the sharply delineated and distinct properties of either the spiritual sphere nor of the political sphere. It is secular and it is sublime. It combines factors unknown and incommunicable, as well as factors that are public and apparent. It has no precedence. Its results are unknown. Its methods are contingent. It is something experimental. It may fail, it may succeed. To be ethical, Gandhi writes, I hold by the relative truth as I have conceived it. This is very unlike the categorical imperative. When it combines contradictory elements and diverse viewpoints, and when it is something perverse and shape-shifting, ethics becomes a resource for responsiveness and flexibility at times of oppression and suffering. That's it, responsiveness and flexibility. And which can, you know, times of suffering can bring out various monomanias and fixations of aims, of personality, of forms. I want to destroy you. I will destroy myself. This is what justice looks like. This is the kingdom of heaven. This is true. This is inadmissible. This will never change. The forms of post-colonial ethics that I've been hinting at, an ethics that opens up a zone of uncertainty, comes out of an agonism between the principles of renunciation and surplus. Now, this is a suggestion. I don't want to hammer it out in the course of my argument, but I'll try and evoke it. I'll try and evoke this point, and I'll try not to take too long, I promise. What is meant by injury? So, you know, at the beginning I made this claim that post-colonial ethics achieves its best form as a kind of a non-injuriousness, non-violence. I mean two things by this. The first is simple. Non-injuriousness has been a really powerful current of many anti-colonial and anti-racist movements. You know, within projects of decolonization in the global South and the American civil rights movement. This is really surprising. That it is such a powerful component, if not the main component of these movements. And I think we should take pause and ponder the kind of miracle of this emphasis in these movements. Second, and this is the salient point, that post-colonial traditions of nonviolence respond to and they point to the constitutive injuriousness of modern colonialism in all its forms. The diagnosis is that empire is injurious. And this applies to a variety of imperialisms. Let's consider some as we begin the unfinished work of always building on the catalogue of imperialisms that we participate in, that we are subject to. Industrial imperialisms of the 19th century, new imperialisms of the 20th century, scramble for Africa. Toxic nuclear and chemical imperialisms of the Cold War that targeted much of East Asia, Korea, Japan, Philippines, Vietnam, and which saw the emergence of currently ongoing Soviet imperialisms in Eastern Europe with the pervasive undercurrent from the beginning of nuclear threat and fallout. Non-Western imperialisms, the example of Japan in the rest of Asia, aggressive interventions in the Middle East, settler colonialisms ongoing against indigenous populations. And no less, many post-colonial regimes stand charged with modes of internal colonialism against vulnerable domestic populations, gender, sexuality, ethnic, religious minorities included. So in these contexts, and they are wide, and I want to say the term injuriousness in these contexts of modern imperialisms, and that's where I'm restricting myself, because I think when we move across time, we need a different template. In these contexts, injuriousness has a specificity. It doesn't just refer to physical violence, though that too, that is very important too. So let me elaborate. Now, the extractive and instrumentalizing energies of modern imperialism, make for a very distorted kind of biopolitics. And this is a word from the French philosopher Michel Foucault, and I use it to indicate a kind of politics that is concerned with aliveness, with the fact of there being life. Now, in the case of empire, subject populations, indeed we can now speak of the subject planet, are sustained and kept alive through a calculus of instrumental harm. That is, by commuting an enslaved life into no more, no less than raw labor, or say by optimizing the modernization of a territory only for the extraction of resources, and with minimum concern for human and ecological futures, leave alone flourishing. So this is a keeping alive, and I'm quoting from Achille Mbembe here, this is a keeping alive in a state of injury. Keeping alive in a state of injury. A person or entity is injured tout court when separated from the integrity of biological, affective, cultural, historical, political, and ecological life. This or that person may be cut off from full political participation in a nation state, from the products and payoffs of their own labor, from the land or landscape in which legends of creation are inscribed. So we have many ways of advancing an understanding of injuriousness in this sense as a kind of separation, you know. And I'll give you a couple of examples. You know, I could go on and on, but I won't, promise you. I could give you a couple of examples. One is from the British welfare economist and socialist R.H. Tawney, who was wounded in the First World War, and he described injury itself as this experience of being abandoned, of being thrown into unpeopled space, of being cut off. Of course, the brilliant philosopher, mystic Simone Weil has a similar thought when she speaks of injury in her tract War and the Iliad as being turned into a thing when alive. Being turned into a thing when alive, which is the experience of being brutally separated from inner and outer worlds, from one's own aspirations, from one's own best self, and from the empathy of others. Okay. Ethics of renunciation. Now, in colonial contexts, actually in all contexts of oppression, the labor of consciousness raising is taken with creating attunements to injury and bringing about an understanding of the entire imperial apparatus as comprehensively injurious, as contaminated through and through with injuriousness. Now, in such settings, ethics can take the form of renunciation. What do I mean? So I'll tell you a story. Jomo Kenyatta, the Prime Minister and President of independent Kenya, has a parable about this post-colonial ethics of renunciation. It's called the Gentleman of the Jungle, or the Man Who Shared His Hut. And it is a story from 1938. In this story, there's a very kind person, kind-hearted man, advisedly. He shares his jungle hut with a number of needy animals who need shelter from the rain, who are hungry, who are lonely, and so on. Now, each act of hospitality results in exploitation. A lion, a buffalo, an elephant, a hyena, an alligator, a rhinoceros, a leopard, a fox, in turn, evict their human host from his own hut and begin to occupy it themselves. As each case is brought before the Jungle Commission, a thinly veiled allegory for imperial government, the human plaintiff is advised that though he may rebuild his hut on another site, he actually has no legal claim to his existing property. In the end, the man builds a large hut, and before long, all the animals rush in and occupy it. They begin to quarrel about who gets the most comfortable spot and about their entitlements in general. As the animals are embroiled in fighting over the spoils, the man, the plaintiff, sets the hut on fire. Jungle lords, all his goods and possessions included, left with nothing. No friends, no enemies, no hosts, no guests, no habitation, no property, to his name, nothing but his own solitary, naked singularity. He finds the peace he has lacked all his life and lives happily ever after. In the era of 20th century decolonization, what I'm calling an ethics of renunciation won the endorsement of non-Western and Western observers alike. Western observers took the lead in declaring renunciation the best, the canonical form, not only of post-colonial ethics, but of any thinking worth its salt in the longue durée of the global South. Instances of renunciation were compared very favorably to the perceived materialism of anti-colonial revolutionary politics. Such revolutionary projects were accused of instrumentalism and charged of merely seeking to appropriate the injurious tools and infrastructure of this or that oppressor for alternative ends and gains, but ends and gains nonetheless. By contrast, the argument went, an anti-colonial ethics of renunciation does something different. It is a project of total expropriation, a refusal to partake in any benefit that obtains from the colonial injurious system. The great European thinkers, Hannah Arendt and Karl Jaspers, argued that non-Western asceticisms were a sign of sort of native modernity. And by implication, that renunciation was the secret ingredient of any meaningful modernity at all. I mean, this is a point anticipated early in the 20th century by Max Weber in his Protestant Ethics, Spirit of Capitalism, where he argues that rationalization is really an otherworldly asceticism, integral to the spirit of capitalism. Let me stay with these themes for just 1 minute, with your patience. Now, the ideal of renunciatory modernity that I'm describing, with the help of Arendt and Jaspers and Weber, has 3 features. Okay? It describes entities and structures and institutions that achieve something we could call formation or species identity within processual time. So in colonial discourse, we often hear, such and such a culture is not advanced because it doesn't have clear hierarchies, clear political institutions, and another one is more advanced because it has those things. Okay. Now, 2, such species identity or formation requires, factors of internal coherence. Institutions and forms have to have uniformity, they have to have durability, they have to have conformation. And mainly, and this is the point that's important to me, they have to have factors of distinction. That is a way of achieving uniformity, durability, and conformation through processes of individual differentiation from a given milieu and from other species and non-species. None of this, finally, none of this is possible. The clarity, none of this is possible without capacities of separation, oppositionality, and adversity. In a nutshell, values of emergence and formation and species identity are founded on principles of rupture and break. So in the Kenyatta story I told you, the man in the jungle comes into his own capacities and freedoms only when he breaks all his ties with the world as he knows it and with his own desires in that world. An ethics of renunciation, I am suggesting, may well refuse to partake in colonial injuriousness, but precisely by so doing, by separating itself radically from the perceived contagion of colonialism, by seeking a much too pure and purified form of anti-colonialism, it incorporates a constitutive violence within the very non-violence to which it is committed. The brilliant thinker-writer Walter Benjamin famously defended something like an ethics of renunciation in his breakthrough 1921 essay, Critique of Violence. There's a divine violence, Benjamin argued, that becomes non-violent on account of its disinterest in ends, its non-instrumentality. It stands liberated from questions of material and physical security and the tug of desires. It refuses to partake in the world. It defies the realm of necessity. Now, there's something absolutely thrilling and ennobling about this stance, but it is based on the view somewhere, that there is something ignoble and abject in the quest for life as such, for the preservation of life, for the tending of life. And this makes me uncomfortable, faced as we are with specters of ecological extinction. The build-up through war and terror of countless refugee populations seeking conditions of livability, just livability across the world. The existential anxieties that beset women, trans and sexual minorities each passing minute of our shared time. As many as 828 million people still go hungry. After steadily declining for a decade, world hunger is on the rise. It affects nearly 10% of people globally. So what is the value of an ethics and a non-violence that devalues the mere life, good, bad, and ugly, that we share with each other in precious planetary cohabitation? I'm nearly there. Ethics of surplus. So recently, I had a very illuminating conversation with someone who has been a great architect of civil society in Pakistan. In our conversation, we were very mindful of the artificial political differences that partition our respective countries of origin. And our complaint was how these artificial differences have begun to saturate everyday life and common perceptions, as infrastructure does. You know, it changes the people within it slowly, inexorably. That's why ethical infrastructures are important. So my interlocutor had a moment of nostalgia for politicians of the past. He said, you know, people like Jinnah and Nehru, they were ethical people. They never forgot their humanity for the cause of this or that political obligation. Now, the qualities that my interlocutor deemed ethical consist actually not of virtue, that is, being kind, being generous, thoughtful, civil, although of course these things matter. Rather, he deemed ethical a capacity for inconsistency and contradiction. That is to say, when this or that political leader forgets their political agenda and engages with the distress of an adversary, or when we allow ourselves to be derailed from this or that objective by additional hopes and aspirations, our own, those of others, that we had not accounted for, we become aware of something that the poet Rabindranath Tagore once described in his 1930 Hibbert Lectures at Oxford University as a state of surplus. A state of surplus. Now, by the notion of surplus, Tagore means to encourage the belief that we are actually always more in a position to give than we imagine. You know, especially when we are going through hardship, physical hardship, psychical hardship. He just says, you have more than you think you do. Look into your wallet. There's more. There's always more. But, you know, surplus also includes other factors. It implies, in Tagore's wonderfully rich thinking, a plurality of personality that we carry everywhere with us. We are citizens, we are non-citizens. We come from certain places, there are places that are forbidden to us. We work, but we also have leisure. We speak certain languages, There are languages we don't understand fully. By extension, surplus also means a condition of multiple identifications. We are never saturated in truth by just one attachment or other, say to a national or a religious group. Now, thinking that comes out of the inequities of gender, of colonialism, sexuality, class, xenophobia, race, has been especially attentive to the surplus of complex entanglements in structures of oppression. These include inevitable factors of codependent life that endure, say, in the inextricability of forms in any post-colonial aftermath, languages, institutions, epistemologies. Equally, more so, the post-colonial condition is alive to the ambivalence, as American sociologist and civil rights activist W.E.B. Du Bois called it, of double consciousness. In such circumstances, we may simultaneously deride and yearn for resources that are available to us, our mother tongue, our homegrown remedies, and simultaneously yearn for and deride others to which we are not entitled, European philosophy, a world-famous antiquity, or all of the above. Du Bois writes, and I'll just quote a little bit of it, "It is a peculiar sensation, this double consciousness, this sense of always looking at oneself through the eyes of others, of measuring one's soul by the tape of a world that looks on in amused contempt and pity. One ever feels his two-ness. The history of the American Negro is the history of this strife, the longing to attain self-conscious manhood, to merge his double self into a better and truer self. In this merging, he wishes neither of his older selves to be lost." He wishes neither of his older selves to be lost. An ethics of surplus, simply put, does not seek to surpass the contradictions of uneven historical life, indeed of uneven life as such. It rejects any final perfective settlement of values and of scores. The disposition is intolerant of immutability. It doesn't believe a disposition that bad things turn into good things, though that too. It's rather more interested in continuities between base and pure elements in either directions. The Buddhist philosopher Nagarjuna is actually very interesting on this. He says he was very interested in alchemy. And he says a power may be called miraculous when it can turn stone into gold and gold into stone. By this measure, an ethics of surplus may never achieve the prerogatives of emergence and formation available to an ethics of renunciation. Yet, it may bypass the separations at the core of injuriousness itself. Now for that story. Valmiki. There's a popular story in India about Valmiki, poet, author of the epic Ramayana. It gets to the essence of a post-colonial ethics that opens up a zone of uncertainty and which I've been conjuring so far. Let me tell this story then, in conclusion. A high-born child gets lost in a forest. He is rescued by a scavenger. She teaches him how to convert waste into reusable material and harness nutrients in dead matter. A famine settles on the land. The scavenger becomes a hunter. The animals perish in a drought. The hunter becomes a murderer. One day, he sets on a band of wandering ascetics. They plead for their lives and they urge the murderer to mend his ways through the repetition of a mantra, a mystical formula of invocation or incantation. But try as he can, as he does, the murderer can't get his mouth around any of these numinous phonemes recommended by the ascetics. So he settles on a word he knows best, Mara, the Sanskrit word for kill, Mara. He sits on the ground and he chants Mara for 63,000 years. An anthill or Valmika forms around him and covers him completely. When the ascetics return to the same spot after a very long time, admittedly, they hear sounds coming from the anthill. Some hear the word for kill, Mara. Others can only make out an established one-syllable seed sound reputed to bring an end to destruction, Ram. Some hear the tangle of both articulations, Mara, 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 Mara. When they dismantle the anthill, there are no remains. The murderer has become the sound of the coincidence of opposites. So to conclude, postcolonial ethics, I've been saying, achieves its exemplary form as a critique of colonial injuriousness, understood as a regime of separations and partitions. It is marked in this endeavor by agonism between the principles of renunciation and surplus. The practice of renunciation is at the heart of an ethos of modernity, yet it repeats the separations and partitions of colonial injuriousness. The principle of surplus is more attentive to entanglements within history and invests post-colonial ethics, indeed ethics as such, with a power to open up a zone of uncertainty in times of crisis. Life belongs to this zone. Thank you again from the bottom of my heart.